students, my name is Swati Giridhar. I am computer science lecturer in Shakthi Pre-University College. So today we are going to discuss chapter 7, classes and objects. Let's see what are the contents included in this chapter. So contents includes to understand the need of classes, to understand the definition and declaration of classes, to understand the use of member functions inside and outside the classes, to understand the process of accessing and manipulating the member of classes, to illustrate the use of classes through application using simple programs and important questions. So let's see what do you mean by classes and objects and how to use classes and objects in our programming. So classes and objects are most important parts of C++ programming language. An object is nothing but object is defined to be an instance of class. A class is a user-defined data type. So once you define a class, you can create n number of objects of that classes. A class can be defined as class combines data elements and functions. So a class includes class name, member functions and data elements. So data elements in a class are called data members and the functions in a class are called as member functions. So here you need to remember what do you mean by data members and member functions. So let's see what do you mean by what is the general syntax of classes. So how to define class? So class contains class, class name, open flag bracket, private, member data, member functions, protected, member data, member functions, public, member data and member functions, closing flag bracket terminated by semicolon. So let's see what you mean by class. Class is a keyword. Class name is nothing but name given to the class. So private, protected and public, these are called as access specifiers. So let's discuss this later. So you have to remember these are nothing but access specifiers. So in every access specifier we have member data and member functions. In protected access specifier we have member data and member functions. These are nothing but these are optional in a class. So let's see what we mean by access specifier. Every data member of a class is specified by 3 levels of access protection for hiding data and functions. So we are using access specifier just for hiding data and functions of a class. So that's the main objective of object-oriented programming. So access specifier defines scope of the data. So why are we using it? We are using it to define the scope of data. So by default, if you don't define any access specifier in a class, then it is by default it is considered as private. So if you don't define any class, so just class, class name, and if you define data members and member functions in a class, so by default these data comes under private access specifier. So let's see 3 access specifiers here. Private. So private access means a data member can only accessed by member functions. So member declared under private accessible only within a class. So only the members can access the data elements or the variables used under private section. So protected. Protected members which are declared using protected can be accessed only by member functions and friend functions. So if you define under protected, member function can access it and friend function can access these data outside the class or inside the class. So let's see what you mean by public. Public access means that members can be accessed by any functions, any member functions and friend functions inside and outside the class. So it is better to define any members under public section. So members of the class. So what are called as members of the class and how to define? Let's see how to define the classes and what are the general form to define classes. So members of a class can be a data or functions. So data, if you have a data or functions, these are called as members of a class. Private and protected members of class can be accessed only through member functions. So member functions can access private and protected members. So private and protected members cannot be accessed outside the class. So public data members can be accessed directly or indirectly by other members. So these are, let's see the general form, general syntax of class. So you have to create an object. So class object dot member data, class object dot member function. So this is first one is nothing but it is used to define data members and second one here is used to define member function. So let's see what are the different ways of defining member functions. So here we have 2 ways of defining member functions, inside class definition and outside class definition. So inside class definition is nothing but if you define a member functions, once you declare the member functions, you have to define it. So there are two ways of defining member functions. You can define either inside a class or outside a class. So if you define a member functions inside a class, then it is called as inside class definition. And if you define a member or member functions outside a class, then it is called as outside class definition. So general form to define inside class definition is return type, class name, member function. To define it outside, what we have is defining it using scope resolution operator. So when it comes to outside class definition, a definition of member function is similar to a normal function. But the scope of the member function is limited to the class mentioned in the header. The scope remains only to the class defined in the header. The scope resolution operator is used to define the member function outside the class. If you want to define member outside a class, then you have to use a special operator called as scope resolution operator. So let's see what is a general form. So define it. The general form is return type, class name, scope resolution operator, member function. So here the return type is nothing but the return type. Either it may be int, float, character or string, anything. So class name is nothing but name given to the class. Here you are going to define the name of the class where the member function exists. And here where you have scope resolution operator and member function. So member function name here, and you have the body of the class, body of the member. So let's see one simple example for inside class definition. Here you have class rectangle. Rectangle is class is a keyword. Rectangle is nothing but name given to the class. Here we have two access specifiers, private and public. In a private, we have two variables declared under int section, int, length and breadth. Here length and breadth are two variables of type integer. So in public section, we have two member functions. So void int data is a member function, void display is a member function. So here this is nothing but declaration, and we are defining the member functions inside the class. So void get data is a function, member function, and here what we are going to do is in length and breadth. So we are giving values. We are taking values at the runtime for length and breadth. Here we have void display function. So we are going to display length and breadth here. So this is an example. This is a class rectangle defined, and here we are going to close the class with a semicolon, and we have two member functions declared inside the class. Let's see one more example how it looks when we define the member functions outside the class. Here we have one more class called test. Test, it contains two access specifiers. So it should be here, this is nothing but public. So here, so we have private A and B. We have two variables under in the type integer A and B, and in public section we have two member functions of type integer. So int sum is one member function, int product. So these functions you have of type integer. So here we are closing the class and we are defining these two members outside the class. So int test, test is nothing but a class name. Here integer is nothing but return type of this function. Test is a class name, scope resolution operator and member function name. Here we are opening it and we are returning the sum of two numbers. To sum of two numbers return, so it is type integer. This function is going to return a plus b. It is nothing but integer value when you call this function. So we have one more function, product of type integer. So the general form here is int test scope resolution operator product. So we are returning here product of two numbers, return a into b. Here we are defining class is closed here with a semicolon. Here we have two member functions defined outside the class. So let's see how to create objects. So we know how to define classes inside a class, how to define member functions inside a class and outside a class. Now let's see how to create objects for a class. So once the class is defined, an object can be created for that class. Objects of a class are declared in the same manner like other variables. So we are declaring the objects in a main function. So general syntax follows: class name, object name 1, object name 2. It's like nothing but integer variable type, return type. So class name, object 1, 2. You can define n number of objects. So example, let's have an example here. We have a class defined with two access specifiers. We have one variable declared num. We have one member function of type void read function. We are going to read a number here, and here we have main functions. In a main function, this is nothing but this is a class name, and we have three objects of class number. You can see here n1, n2 and n3 are nothing but objects of the class number. This is how we are defining objects or creating objects. Once you create an object, you can use this object with a member data and member functions. So accessing the class members. So once you know how to create an object, once you create an object, you can use the data and functions for that class. So once the objects are created, we can access its members. This is achieved using member access operator. To access it, you need a member access operator. So this dot, here you can see the general syntax, object name dot member data, object name dot member function. So this dot is called as member access operator. So let's see an example. Here we have class number defined. So you may have number, we have one function, this is nothing but data member, we have member function, we have one number, input number function, and in a main we have created an object n for class number, and here this is how you can access it using n.read. In this line we are going to use object n, and we are calling the function member function read function here to access. So what this function does, this function calls this and takes input at the time of using it, at the time or at the compilation time, runtime. So we can also use array for objects. So an array having class type element is known as array of objects. So what we are going to do is we can create the object. Here you can see we have defined the class data with three variables, register number, m1, m2, and in a public section, access by specify public, we have three member functions for get data, put data, and average. Here we are going to input our values, here going to display it, and here we are calculating average using average function. So we are closing the class here. In an int main, we have defined the objects using data. Data is nothing but the class data, and here we have one object stud, and we have array here, array of objects. So this is nothing but we have declared here array of objects of classes. So how to use this? Let's see. In this example, we have integer I. For I is equal to 3 times. Here we have 3 array. So I is equal to 0 to 3. What we are going to do? We have get data. Get data functions, in what it does, it gets value at the time of using the program. So return 0. Why you need return 0 here? Here we have specified integer. So we are returning type 0 here. Returning 0 value since it is a return type integer. So objects as function argument. So all objects can be passed as a function arguments. We have two types, pass by value and pass by reference. So what happens? In a pass by value, a copy of object is passed to the function. So what happens here? The copy of object is passed. The function creates its own copy and uses it. So functions create its own copy here. The change made in the objects inside the function do not affect the original value. So using pass by value, the changes, whatever changes you made does not affect or do not affect the original value of the object. So using pass by reference. In a pass by reference, we are really passing the address of an object. We are not actually passing the values or the original values here. We are just passing the address of an object. The function directly works on the original object. So when you pass the address, the function directly uses the original object using the function call. Whatever changes you made to the object inside the function will reflect the original value. So whatever change you made here will directly reflect the original value. Pass by reference is more efficient since it requires only to pass the address of the object, not the entire object. So let's see what are the important questions in this chapter. So we have learned what do you mean by classes, object, how to create a class, how to create an object. So object can be passed, or how to use a member functions, how to use data members, member functions, how to call it in a main program. So once you know that, you can create a program using arrays or objects or anything. So let's see what are the important questions. So important questions include what do you mean by class, what is an object, what are data members, what are member functions, what is meant by an array of objects. So how to create an array using objects. So write a syntax. You should know how to write a syntax and definition, definition and class declaration, and how to create objects. So explain how objects of a class can be defined. So these are some of the important questions. So let's see what all we learned. Overall summary. So we have learned what do you mean by objects, classes, data members, member functions, how to bind class or how to create classes, how to use the objects, how to define member functions, how to define data. So we have learned all these things in this chapter. We are going to use these concepts in our coming chapters like inheritance, function overloading, polymorphism, pointers, data files, and etc. So I think these concepts are clear to you. Thank you, students.